Do you own the same trust?
We do. There's two different addresses.
Then it's just you only one vote for your trust. If you put them in different trusts, then you get another vote. Sounds expensive, right?
It is expensive.
It's all worth it though. You're one more vote.
It totally is, right?
You guys are welcome to stay.
It's okay. Over here. I would ask them here. You're fine, I appreciate it.
Also neighbor, I live out here too. On Beulah Avenue, so Stringer Bridge, the other side. Ryan. Oh yeah, right here. Oh yeah. Yes. See you Yeah. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Good to see you guys. See you, Jess.
This lady just moved 2 weeks ago to a different address on Beulah. She used her old address or her new address?
She still own the old property?
Yes.
Okay. She just used the address that she's voting for. Yeah. No. All voted? Yeah, he's pulling up or anything at the. Sure.
Okay, next item of business, until they're officially counted, we'll get back to that in a second. But the next item of business is going to be calling on the, item 4, approved 2022 proposed budget expenditures. And I'll leave for that Chris.
All right, I'm a commissioner who's serving as the treasurer of the district, and the board has a proposed budget for 2022. There were some handouts that some people may have got. There's columns on this budget. Just the proposed budget for 2022, and then give you an idea of how is that different from our forecasted year end of 2021. So we still have, what, 5 months left in 2021, and we're budgeting for 2022. But that's how our bylaws are set up. So the board is proposing to have a total income for 2022 of $200,500. Of that, $195,000 will be the tax levy. Okay, and that's roughly a 10% increase from our forecasted income for 2021 this year. The total administrative is, our proposed budget is $90,000 roughly, and $70. Now that's a large increase over 2021. Okay, and that's coming from two things. One is last fall we felt our electors, our community wanted more information, so we started to create a newsletter, and 2 of them we've done so far, and there's costs associated with that, but it's like $5,000 for both of those. So we mail out those hard copies. Lisa and Val worked really hard on that. And the second thing is our attorney budget is increasing, and that's it's returning to our historical budget we have for attorneys. We've been able to keep our attorney expenses down for the last few years. but we're now, getting into mode where we're gonna be spending more on utilities for the next, mostly having to do with Poe's Hotel on the lake and the expenses. So as you all know, we've joined the lawsuit where the county is being sued, and we've joined as an interested party, and Ron and stuff would explain that more. But basically, we feel we're gonna need a bigger budget for our administrative because of those two things, communication and also for attorney fees. Plant harvesting and control, $59,048, and that's basically inflationary and fuel costs. Total weed and water control, $13,050. That's a large decrease from 2021. That's due to two things. Every 5 years, we do a plant survey. So we hire a company that comes out and it maps out what weeds are in what locations on the lake. And we need that plant survey to submit to the DNR to get our aquatic plant harvesting permit. And that's once every 5 years. And that's about an $8,000 cost. Secondly, we've started implementing lake bed monitoring equipment to really understand the health of the lake. And we'll see the last of those costs this year, 2021, and we don't have them for 2022. So that's the reason for the decrease. The next one is a capital purchase we are preparing for, and that would be a new dump truck. And we want to budget $70,000 for that. Our current truck is about a 1999, and we're spending more money every year to keep it up. And so we want to budget $70,000 for a new dump truck. Now, we're not committing that we're going to buy the dump truck because, as we all know, vehicles are scarce. We don't want to pay a premium. If we feel like we can keep the truck going for another year and then get a truck a year from now that's a much better deal, we may do that. But we're also, the truck could just give up, and then we're gonna need a dump truck for all aquatic plants. And then secondly, the next one is the contingency fund. That contingency fund last year was $15,000, because our unforecasted expenses that might come up in 2022, we wanna increase that to $30,000. Historically, what I do with the contingency fund is we budget $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 each year. And when we get to the end of the year, we don't want to spend that, and we end up quite often taking that contingency fund and we roll it into our capital or equipment fund. And when I talk about the treasurer's report for 2021, I'll talk about how much is in that fund. So the total expense that we want to budget for is $262,000, and that's versus an income of $200,000. So we would be short $60,000. We will make that up because for the last several years we've been saving money in our equipment fund, so we have reserves to be able to pay for that. I personally I don't want to go to the bank and write notes and put the community in indebtedness, so we're very fiscally conservative, put our money away, and forecast for capital expenditures, and we may see that this year for the dump truck of $70,000. So, any questions on the 2022 budget proposal?
The chair would call for a motion to approve the budget as described by Chris. Susan's Clayton moved. Any support out there? Bill? Any comments on the budget? Any questions? Hearing none.
I got a question.
The question.
Yeah.
How much are we approximately spending on fighting the hotel, and how's that going?
I'll give a report later in the meeting on that. We're basically waiting for court scheduling right now, but I'll give a report.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I'll call for the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, motion carried. Next item on the agenda, we'll move to, we have the audit committee report. Or you want to do your associate? We'll go to the treasurer's report.
You'll be next. Okay, Okay, the next paper I want to talk to you about is the financial summary as of August 23rd, today. Total income, so there's 3 columns on this sheet. The first column is what we budgeted for a year ago today. The second column is what we've received year to date, as of today. And then the third column is where are we for our forecast. So we do a paced budget over the year. We have a lot more expenses in the summer than we do in the fall or the winter or the spring. And our budget is, our paced forecast is based on what we have done for several years. When did that spending occur? So a good idea of how our spending is going is that percent forecast. The total income is 152,000. That year to date is 148. We're slightly above our forecasting that we were expecting. Administrative expenses are 53,700. Our year-to-date expenses are 53,386, and that's 109% of our forecast. Now that 9%, that overage is roughly 5% due to office fees of our newsletter, and 5% of that is due to attorney fees that we've exceeded our forecast. Plant and harvesting control, our budget was 55,783, year to date is 35,355, it's 92% of our expectation. Our plant growth this year was slower than in past years, so we haven't seen as many expenses associated with plants. And on the other side of that, our repairs have been higher. We talked about the dump trucks, we had more repair expense for the dump truck and for the John Deere. Weed and water control, budget was 32,550. We've only spent 6,416 so far. Primary reason, the plant study, which is about $8,000, that hasn't occurred yet. That should occur in this fall. I don't know if Stan's gonna talk about it. And the second thing is the lake bed monitoring equipment, we had budgeted for that and we haven't spent all of that this year. So our contingency fund, we had planned for 15,000, we haven't touched that. And our capital purchase, the transporter, we approved last year. The transporter, we have the weed cutter, everybody thinks that's what they always see out there. There's a second piece of equipment that's a dump truck on a boat. So they pull up to it, they dump into it, and it's called a transporter. Now, the transporter costs about $150,000 new. But Stu was able to work out a deal where he traded in, he took our current transporter to have it retrofitted, traded in an old weed cutter we weren't using anymore, and then that upgrade only cost $50,937. So he saved this group $100,000 doing that. And then, so we can. Stan works hard with the DNR and grants, and he's in the process of getting us another $20,000 back in the grants. So we hope to exceed our income budget this year, but you can never count on. So total expense is 145 currently, 94% of our budget. And there at the bottom, the balance sheet. Our current equipment fund has 46,600 in it, and that'll help pay for that dump truck for next year. Our operating funds through that we'll have till December 31st, well into January, are at 198,995, so almost $200,000. And we'll have another $50,000, $70,000 of expenses this calendar year. So, any questions on that financial summary?
Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the treasurer's report? Bill? Support?
Second.
Wendy? Thank you. Any other comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carried. Now, Al, are you ready to give your report?
Sure.
All right, perfect. We got to quiet it down now.
Sorry.
Chris' job was to put everybody to sleep. He did pretty good.
No, I can put people to sleep more easily than Chris did. I was asked to audit the financial records for the district, and I received the records from Chris, and they were in good order. And the overall conclusion is that financial matters of the board are being managed. There's a guideline of about 6 pages on what to audit. Very well written, and I just worked through that checklist that asks you to, check the bank reconciliations, check the approval of the invoices, check for, checks over 2,500 that they're countersigned, things like that. There's a whole list of that stuff, and I went through that. It was very well done. There were very few minor exceptions there. So in general, I had no concerns. I do have a couple of recommendations, and they're a little long here, so I'm not gonna read them, but basically the first one is that the audit guideline that I just mentioned and the bylaws aren't entirely consistent. In the guideline, it'll say to, for instance, there's some sections on miscellaneous expenses, and in the bylaws, there's statements about miscellaneous expenses. They don't really line up there. They're not that clear. So I'm just recommending that they change one or the other so they mesh. There's nothing serious about this. It's just, it's just harder to follow when they're not exactly the same. The second thing is that there are stipends for each of these directors, as you probably know, it's provided for in the bylaws. And that covers their, at least part of their time for what they do for the district. And that's entirely reasonable. In 2 cases, the treasurer and the secretary, they're also paying for supplemental services in that area. And I asked the board to make sure that, just for transparency, that the additional payments that are being made are not, for work that was intended to be covered by the stipends. I could not evaluate whether those expenses were reasonable. They seem reasonable, but I think for transparency, it ought to be the case that the board reviews that. So those were my only 2 comments, and that's all I have.
Any questions? Al, thank you very much. You've done a fine job. We appreciate it. We will look into your recommendations. I know we plan on doing some rewriting of the bylaws for clarity's sake. And so I'm sure the new board, the board from here will look into that. Is there a motion to accept the audit committee report? Pat, okay. Second by Don. All those in favor? Any questions? More questions? Don Stein, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the aquatic plant harvest equipment status report, Commissioner Austin.
All right, the aquatic plants harvesting was a little slower this year, meaning that there wasn't as much growth as last year. Why, we're not exactly sure. They will continue to work through September. We lost one of our employees a couple of weeks ago, so things are a little more difficult to get around and get everything accomplished, but we are still working very diligently at making sure the aquatic plants are taken care of. Chris mentioned our new survey of the aquatic plants, which has been done, but now what they are going to be doing is working with the DNR to help give our report so that we can apply for our 5-year harvesting permit for the next group. So that's in the process. The plant survey has been accomplished by this time. Other than that, no real things. Chris talked about the dump truck, which needs replacing because we bought it used and it's in service and it is really in need of replacement. And that we had a couple glitches this summer, but we'll be taking care of them as we move forward. That's about what I have to say. Is there any questions? Yes.
Yeah. For the first time, the Asian milfoil was moved from the entrance to our bay right up to the piers now. Is there a formalized program to go to try to remove them or what?
There has not a formalized, other than our continually harvesting them and cutting them down. We are no longer using chemicals. That's a questionable situation. So we are working on just simply cutting them and removing them as much as possible. We can cut up to a foot of water
4 feet.
That's not right. Stu?
4 feet is what
4 feet of water,
recommended.
and we have to leave a foot of,
Biomass on
the surface, that's in our permits as requirements. But, as we would take out as much as we possibly.
This is about 6-7 feet of water.
Yeah. So we can only get down to 4 feet with the cutter part.
So it's gonna come back.
Yeah. If you wanna get somebody to actually go in and pull them out, you're allowed to do that. You've got 30 feet from your shoreline, that the DNR will allow you to do not anything you want.
Any other questions? All right, Dan, thank you very much for your report. Next, item is the staff report on lake monitoring and water testing, lake level, and well number 7, Mr. Becker.
By all observations, the lake is doing extremely well, as it has in the past. However, there is some concern with the level of the aquifer, that is the water table of the aquifer, associated with well 7, and that is, it's dropping. We have test wells surrounding the well number 7, and we have a few others scattered throughout, where we measure the actual level, and it's decreased by about a foot over the last period of time. And that is concerning, except as we look into it, we're in a drought now, and the drought, the deficit is about 10 inches of water. And that, I believe, will explain the whole thing. We're checking that out just to make sure indeed it is associated with the drought. And we feel it's not associated with pumping. The pumping rates are about the same as they have been, but again, we're watching it closely. Our chemical testing of the lake and other testing methods continue, and they're about the same, results are about the same. We've been delayed on the assessment of some of the lake bottom measuring equipment due to a number of problems, but we should have those results shortly, and I expect it to be okay. Another item we're working on, and we're working this in conjunction with the West Beulah Protective Association, is to look at the wakeboard boats on the lake and their effect on the quality of the water and whatever. And this is not, we're not out to ban wakeboard boats, we're out to measure what the effect is. And of course, as you see it on the water and on the surface, you can see the waves, we all seen that, and I think most of us probably dislike it. But that is not what we're looking at so much. We're looking at the effect of the boats on the bottom of the lake. With the shallow water, damage can be done, because the boat bottom may be down 4 or 5 feet, and that could really disturb the bottom of the lake. And with the association, Protective Association, we're looking into that matter and trying to get some data on that. If you have any suggestions or any observations there, just get to me or get to Tom Bernhardt from the Protective Association. That's about it. And continue doing our work and monitoring the whole lake, and we want to keep it pristine.
Any questions? Okay, thank you, John. I'd like to.
There's a question here.
Oh,
I've got a question. What's the effect of fertilizers used by companies on the quality of water?
Well, that's a good point. For the most part, phosphorus is the killer, because it really enhances the growth of aquatic plants. And there's a ban on it, of course, if you're on the lake. What we're seeing, and our hydrogeologist has pointed out to us, in the city of Well 7, there are a number of homes, this is in the village now, that use chemicals on their lawn, and that drains into the lake. Likewise, it can precipitate down into the ground and reach Well 7. So we're concerned about that. We're going to work with the village on that to let them know. But certainly, it's not a great thing to see the phosphorus get into the lake, because it just enhances the growth of the aquatic activity.
Just 2 points. A pound of phosphorus would generate 30 pounds of oil. One's a 30. And factually, this Maine is now banned the use of phosphorus in the whole state.
As a point, many of the current people that spread fertilizer, I know I talked to Seasonal Services, They do not use phosphorus. Most of what you buy in Home Depot, if you read the label, does not have phosphorus in there. It's very much discouraged. That's the one thing we discourage. I don't know that if anybody knows of a commercial fertilizing firm that uses phosphorus, you should report it. We will take action to contact them and, try to stop it.
Well, Stan mentioned that the wheat growth in the lake is down, it's probably due to the drought.
All right, any other questions, comments? Okay, I'm gonna interject here, and